Welcome. Today we're going to talk about an introduction to Spring Roo. Today we're going to cover a brief introduction to the Spring framework, what is Spring Roo, and we're going to go over a hands-on demo of a quick start guide of setting up your environment and actually building a project with Spring Roo. But what is Spring Roo? Well, Spring Roo is an easy-to-use development tool for quickly building web applications in the Java programming language, which can be used as a standalone application or as a plugin for Eclipse. It also allows you to build high-quality, high-performance, lock-in-free enterprise applications in just minutes, which you'll see in the demo. Spring Framework is actually a wide variety of tools. You actually go out to spring.io. It's been around for a while. Got multiple different components. The big thing they've been pushing now is Spring Boot, which allows you to build microservices that you can then deploy to the cloud. And they've now introduced Spring Cloud and Spring Cloud Data Flow. Spring Boot allows you to do reactive and servlet stacks. Spring Cloud just gives you an idea of the Internet of Things, mobile browser. It all kind of plugs together. What's cool here with this picture is it actually shows you the different services that you can actually plug in with Spring and the Spring Cloud. Other things they have, go under projects, there's a boatload of different projects they have from Spring.io, Boot, Framework. Essentially, Spring is a collection of tools, libraries that you can use within the Java programming language to basically simplify your development process, kind of shortcut the time it takes to actually get an application from concept to market. So Roo is essentially a development tool. It's not, however, a library or a framework. It's also not an IDE. It's a plugin. It's not really a plugin, but it has a plugin for Eclipse, so you can use command line tools. And Roo is not an annotation process library. It has annotations, but you can actually strip out all of the Roo and just have your application once you're done building the project. And types of application frameworks that get generated, that you can generate with Roo, the whole principle of Roo is to separate the separation of concepts principle, where you separate the different layers of work into different modules. You have a presentation domain data layering, where you can do presentation data layers. You can do domain-driven design. You can also do the common model view controller. The domain layer improves entity relationship management. So now Roo generates the needed logic to maintain the cohesiveness of the relations, taking in account the types of relations, aggregation or composition. And it also added support and commands to generate your DTO classes. So you don't have to build a lot of the back-end boilerplate code anymore. With just a couple simple commands, Roo does it all for you. You have the view layer, which has the scaffolding improvements and uses features of the thime leaf views. So the scaffolding involves the controllers refactored to support entity relationship management, master detail view generator to manage the entity relationships, several technologies for rendering views, and they're supported by default Spring Roo supports thime leaf, Jackson 2. Other things in the thime leaf view, you get Dojo has been replaced with HTML5, CSS3, Bootstrap, and jQuery components, so it's very modern look and feel with modern-day HTML5 and browser components. They also included advanced UI components like Select2 and data tables. The handler methods for those components are also generated for easier customization. The thime leaf views includes a few JavaScripts and possibly move the JavaScript code to .js files that allows you to compartmentalize your JavaScript now instead of having to have one big JavaScript file, which you did in previous versions of Roo. The view layer generate engine is based on the free marker templates. Additionally, Roo provides a command to install them in your project, let you customize the view layer scaffolding before executing it. We're actually going to be using the thime leaf view within our demo today. and also new amazing Spring Roo responsive themes. So you can actually go out and find some other themes that you can actually install within Roo. What's required? Well, before you get started, you have to have a couple of dependencies. So if you're on Linux, Apple's, or a Windows-based operating system, Roo will work. Other operating systems may work, but not necessarily guaranteed. Again, this is a command line interface like Java. You can almost get away with building it on any type of operating system, but these are the typical three that you would probably encounter in the real world. Any version of the JDK 6 or higher. Be careful with JDK 9. It's still got a little bugginess to it, so not everything is fully supporting JDK 9 yet, but it does work for 6, 7, and 8. You also need Apache Maven 3.3 or higher. Roo is heavily dependent on the Maven library so that you can import all your third-party dependencies and Roo dependencies within your projects. And it's also recommended that you use the latest of Java and Maven, but just be careful, like I said, if you try to jump to Java 9, you may run into some problems. All right, so let's jump out to the demo. So first thing we need to do, we need to go to the Spring website, go to projects, and we need to download Spring Roo. So we go to the Spring Roo project. Here we go. Over here, you have your documentations, what releases, click download. Okay, the latest current general availability is 1.3.2, but we're going to go ahead and use the version 2 because there's a lot of cool little libraries in there. So you just download, click save. I've already done that, so we'll jump out. Go to downloads. So Spring Roo 2, and here's your libraries here. So you have bin, your executables in here. So there's your Roo bat and Roo shell commands. Bat for Windows, shell for Linux or Mac. And under config, we have an STS sites bookmark. This is what we're going to need to load the plugin that we need into Eclipse or STS. Open this guy real quick. Here we are. So it contains the 2 paths to the nightly builds and the standard releases for the Roo plugin for STS. Close that. Yep. All right, so if you have Eclipse or STS installed, you would open that. Apologies, I had it open and accidentally closed it. I have STS open. So to install the plugins, if you're on Linux or Mac, you go under Help. If you're on Windows, it will be under Window. You will have Install New Software there. So go under Install New Software, go to Manage, Import. And then you go out to your Downloads, Roo config, and there's your STS bookmarks. Click OK. It will then add it to your list here. So you have Spring Roo Nightly and Release. Come in here and you select which one you want to look for. I went ahead and I did Nightly. And then under Extensions, and filter through that, look for Roo. I've already installed it, so I'll unhide install. And you want to install the Spring IDE Roo support plugin. Once that guy's installed, you will then get a Roo shell plugin installed. And here you can click the little plus new Roo project. And now we're building our first Roo project. Now you can do all this from command line, but the IDE makes it really simple. So always use the IDE. Again, though, if you want, you can use the command line, but to just get started, use Eclipse. It's so much faster. So we'll do Roo catalog, do com sample Roo, leave it as standard. I'll get into some of these other project types in a future presentation, but for now, we're just going to stick to the standard. Do next, finished. And now it's going to throw up a little bit of Roo code here while it builds the project. And now we have a project. And inside our project is this little log.roo script. And this is the command that it actually ran to build the project. So if you were to copy this and run this from the command line, this would build your project for you. Now what's cool about this is this log.roo will contain all the commands that you type in your little Roo shell here as you build your project. So if you need to rebuild your project, you can essentially copy this file out, create a new project, paste it back in, and rerun the script. So it will essentially rebuild your project in one fell swoop, so you don't have to retype everything again. So it's very reusable. For now, we're going to use this guy. So the first thing you want to do, it's pretty self-explanatory. It says, hey, welcome to Spring Roo. For assistance, hit Control Space. And then, or type hint. Well, Control Space brings up all the current commands that you can start with right now. So let's see. Well, we have help and hint. So let's start with hint. It says, oh, you need to, why don't you start and create a JPA? So we need to create a JPA setup. So JPA, Control Space. Hey, okay. So the only thing I can do with JPA is setup. Hit Control Space again. Oh, I can do provider. So I don't need to type anything again. Now I have multiple options. So I can do an Eclipse link, or I can do hibernate. And while it gives you the pop-up here, if you look in the little Roo shell behind, it actually gives you some additional information as to what it's trying to do. So we're going to create an in-memory hibernate database. So we'll do hibernate. We're going to create a database. And we're going to do an in-memory database. Hit enter. And as you can see, it has created an application properties file for us. We go under resources. Here's our application properties. And as you can see, it just contains the driver information for our database and the URL to our database. In this particular case, it's our in-memory. If we were doing MySQL, this would essentially be the MySQL connection properties, including username and password. All right, so we now have that. But now what do we need to do? Well, type hint again. All right, so now we've created our database and we've created our JPA. So now we need to actually add things to our project or to our database. So we can start by typing ENT like it says. Oh, entity. So we need to create a JPA entity. Again, Control Space. Hey, this is going to be a class. And it's giving you an example right here. So it says, really, you should put it in your domain.entity. And that's because it's doing the domain framework or domain development application framework model. So the model I'm going to use is going to be the one we used previously, which is the product catalog. So we'll start with vendor. So I'll create a vendor. That's it. And then you can do some other commands here, abstract, extends, and so forth, just like you can in Java. But for now, I just want vendor. So now it's created a vendor Java class. It's created my bean, it's created my entity, and it's doing an equals and toString. All this gets generated behind the scenes. So now if I go up under source main Java, I have my com Roo, I have my root catalog, and I now have vendor. And vendor has some annotations for Roo, which is fine. It's mainly there so that the Roo shell can communicate with your code. When you're all finished, you can actually remove all the scaffolding from your project. The only problem is once you remove the Roo scaffolding, you can't re-add the Roo scaffolding. You would have to essentially rebuild the project. So if you keep the scaffolding there, you can always come out to the Roo shell and manipulate your project using Roo without having to actually go in and manipulate your code. All right, so we have this. So inside of our vendor, it gives us an ID and it gives us a version. Right, so now we need to add some fields. So do a hint, and okay, you can create Spring data repositories related to your generated entity. So I can do a repository, which I don't necessarily want to do, but what I really want to do is I want to add some columns to my table, or essentially some class variables to my data object. So we need to actually add some fields. So let's start with our vendor table should have a name. So we need to do a field. And name can be a string, a field name, and so we have field, so you can pick your annotation type or the primitive type, so it can be a string, int, boolean, whatever. Then your field name is going to be the name of the field, and then you can set it to be column, comment, force, or we can set it to be not null. So if we have to have a database table column that cannot be null, you set it to not null. So now it generated our name. We go look at our code up here, give ID, and now we have vendor name. However, vendor name really may or may not be required. So if I want to make a change, by the way, to get the list, when your little command window down here is empty, if you push the up arrow, it will show you a list of your history of commands. So, but if I want to just try to change my vendor name, it says, oops, it already exists. If I want to forcefully change it, you then have to use the force command. And it's now overwritten my vendor name. It can now be null. We'll look up here at vendor name. It doesn't have the null anymore over it. All right, so we got name. Let's see, we'll just add another one here. So we'll add address 1. We'll add address 2. City. State's not permitted because it's a SQL command, so we'll do vendor state. If we want to make a number, so we go back to field, like number, zip code. Now, when dealing with numbers or some of the other primitive types or other field types here, so Boolean, date, some of the other types here, you have to actually specify which Java class to actually apply it to. So we do zip, and then I do type, and then, okay, so it's a number. What type of number in Java? Is it going to be a primitive? Is it going to be a class? So byte, double, float, int. Zip code can be an int because it's small. And then you can, again, set other things. So you can actually set decimal max, decimal min, max size, minimum size, not null. In this case, we'll leave it not null. Okay. So we now have zip code. Country. Site. Here's one. Different. Do field date. Start date. Type. Calendar date. Want it not to be null. Also want to have an end date. We've got address, city, state, zip, phone number. It may be too small, so we'll do long. Phone. All right, so now if we look at our vendor, we have ID, we have version, we have vendor name, address 1, 2, city, vendor state, zip, county, website. We have our timestamp. It sets the time format to medium. If you actually look at the date format, short, medium, long, pretty cool. The date time feature was added back in 8. And phone number. Those. And for right now, we'll stop with that and we'll just build out the rest of the project. So we'll do repository, JPA, build all. You could also build just a particular entity. So you could actually build a specific entity. So if you needed to add an entity, you could just rebuild that entity, not the whole project. Okay, so now we need a service. All, same kind of feature here. Service gives you the option to do all or entity. Or if at any time you have a question, you can do service, int. Then it will give you some additional information on services. Okay. You have repository, you now need a service, so we do service, all. Then you can do API package or import. We're just going to do everything, all. And now we actually have an API, but we actually need some more web components to this. So let's go ahead and add some MVC to it. So we can just do web MVC setup. Oh, we've just now added the MVC configuration to our project. Repository configuration. So there's our Jackson information, the web MVC configuration file. We do web MVC again. And this time we're going to set up our views. Oops. I forgot to type. So if you actually forget some of the commands, it tells you as you go along. It's like, oops, you still need something else. Okay, so type, family. Use the default template that they give us. Look at that, it just generated a whole bunch of classes for us. There's our web, reports. So we're getting there. We're almost there. So we just did the view. So now let's do web, MVC. Now let's set up our controllers. And we'll do all controllers, and we will do the response type. You can choose JSON or ThymeLeaf. For now, we use ThymeLeaf. Do web MVC again. Controller. All. Your path prefix. Now built our API prefix. All right, all that looks good. Project compiles, everything looks happy over here. Look at all this generated code. It took us just a minute to type all this in, but look, we now have an API service. We have our implementation for the service. And it built all this for us. So now I go down here to my boot dashboard because we did when we built this as standard, it went ahead and it created as a boot configuration project, so we can actually run the root catalog application, and this will kick off a boot application. But because we're using STS Eclipse, hey, it recognizes that we actually have a boot project in our workspace. All we have to do is come down here, select the one we want, which is root catalog, click the stop run, go look at console. starting. Spring Roo. What's nice about this is once it's built, you can then go under the banner.txt and you can change the banner or create multiple banners for your deploy. So when you start this on another server, you can have like dev, prod. You can basically say which server this is, or if you're deploying this out or selling this as a product, you can put your company information in here. All right, it started Tomcat. Tomcat started on 8080, and it has deployed our application here. If you have problems, you can always look at your properties here, click the little URL, and there's our project. So within minutes, we have a fully functional application. And if we click under vendor, we can list vendors. There's our little product list now. Look, we can also export the information into CSV, XLS, PDF. We can delete. We can add a vendor. We'll add Acme Toys. I think zip was the only thing I made. Null and start date and end date. Save. We now have our vendor card. Back. Now on our list. We can delete. Accept. Done. I built none of the GUI interface for this. All we did was build the backend scaffolding. Roo did the rest. So that's just a quick how-to. Now, let's make this a little more complex. So if I were to delete this project, back to my Roo shell, click my new Roo project again, do Roo catalog again. Keep it standard. Next. Finished. All right, so we now have our Roo project. So we'll go in here and we'll go under log Roo, and we're going to add all of our commands that we want to build our full product catalog. There's our JPA setup provider hibernate. So that's our in-memory database. This could also be to our MySQL database. We created an entity for JPA, class domain vendor. There's all of our vendor columns. I also created an item entity with all of our item values. We have inventory, we have product, we have image, again, with all of their corresponding column names. The only thing I didn't mention is to set dependencies. You have to go into that particular class that you create and then set a dependency to the other classes or to the other tables. This is setting a one-to-many relationship. This will generate an error when it builds the project initially, and I'll show you what to delete to just make it work out of the box. This is just a cookie cutter example, so I didn't get too deep into these particular dependencies. We'll cover that in a future class. Then, once we have all of our entities defined, we build the repository, we set the services, we then build our MVC setup, and we're done. So, instead of having to type all of this, I can then simply come out here, get the actual path name for this. That. At your root command, you can type script and put in your path to your script, hit enter. That.
Did you say? Did you? Yeah.
Yeah, forgot to say. Yeah, so it basically wiped out what I just put in. Back over. Save. There we go. Now if I rerun that command, now it'll execute all the scripts. under a minute, I have a fully functioning project for my product catalog. Now, like I said, it was going to have one little problem. Oh, it's still building. Building. Yep. In the delete function, it's trying to delete the dependencies. Like I said, this was just a quick cookie cutter. I'll get into actually setting up and defining the dependencies more thoroughly in the next lesson. But for now, we'll just delete those 3 dependencies where it was trying to delete them. Everything looks happy. Do run as Spring Boot, or just come down here again. Start. Started. And properties. URL. Now we have a fully functional application. So we now have, we can create items, we can list items. So you can now completely work with your database. Fully functioning CRUD interface that you can now go in and you can configure the front end application. So that. So to recap, we briefly went over what Spring is and looked at some of the different projects that Spring has to offer. We talked about what Spring Roo is. Again, it's not an IDE. It's not a application. It's not really a traditional application of a sense. It's simply a code generator. It's not a library. It's not a framework. And it's not an annotation processing library. It's just a code generator that uses annotation. We walked through setting up a Roo environment for essentially Linux and Mac, and we walked through building our first project. Any questions?
Hey there, Michael. So will you be able to use those, so specifically for the Roo.domain classes, do you have to go in and define each table if you're using a MySQL table? Do you have to do that same process with that, or can you just do a Roo.domain -- all? Is that possible?
I believe that is. I didn't want to cover that in this particular lesson. I'm going to actually cover the more advanced topics like that in the next one. I believe you can. I believe it's similar to kind of like that code generating tool, the JPA one. Was it JEdit? Where I believe you can take your SQL, import the SQL, and it will generate it. In the early days of Roo 1, no, you could not do that. And Rob and I, way back in the day when Roo was still in incubation, we were playing around with it, and we actually wrote our own scripts to generate exactly what you're asking for. So we would take a SQL file, and then we would actually kind of like scrape it and create the different tables and views and of that nature based off of the SQL. I'm pretty sure Roo has that built in now. However, you have to be careful. Like when I was showing you the Hibernate and the JPA examples in the product catalog, if you have it set to create and not edit, it will wipe out your table every time. So if you point it to your MySQL base and you have that set as create, you just lost your table.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That's good to know. Yeah.
So be careful. But I will be covering that probably not in the next presentation, but in the one following that. I'll be getting into those topics.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Is this, can this be the same as the Spring Boot, or these are totally different if they're not even related?
This is different. This is a code generator tool where Spring Boot is essentially a microservice of Tomcat.
Oh.
So the Spring is essentially Spring's way of creating a microservice within your project so you can actually configure your Tomcat in an executable boot function that can be deployed locally, it can be deployed to servers, or it can be deployed to the cloud on microservers.
Okay. So you don't have to code in the Spring Roo, isn't it? It just does everything behind the scenes?
Correct.
Or just,
it's all command-based, no coding.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess just to follow up on that, it's a you can do everything in Roo, but really what it does is it gets you, as Michael noted, all that stuff that it's generating, it's getting you started. It gets you sort of like, in a sense, Spring Boot allows you. It sort of has some pieces that are in place that allows you to like get started sooner in your development. Roo is focused on different applications, and it is much more a code generator and not really necessarily a platform. Once you've generated your code from Roo, you technically can do whatever you want with it. You can change it around. You can do you can add on top of it. Obviously, you can do things like change up your CSSs and your basic displays and look and feel and things like that. But this is instead of Roo, instead of you having to write all that code, it'll do it for you.
What they call boilerplate.
Precisely.
Well, if there's no more questions, thanks again for your time. If you have any questions, comments, or need assistance, shoot us an email at info@developernerd.com or contact us on the website, blog, Vimeo, wherever you find this video. Thanks and have a great day.